G'day bike riders, welcome back to another video looking at bike infrastructure. Is it parking or is it a bike lane? I'm the Bike Route Buddy, bringing you bicycle infrastructure reviews from Geelong and further afield. For those of you that ride in Victoria, Australia, you would have no doubt come across the bike lane that permits parking. Or is it a parking lane that permits cycling? These identity crisis bike lanes don't seem to know their purpose and try to hedge their bets to please everyone, but in the end they please no one. It is pretty hard to ride in these kinds of bike lanes when they are full of legally parked cars. There are plenty of examples of this kind of parking lane, labelled as bike lane around Geelong where I live. I wonder who came up with this concept. Let's put up some bike lane signs. That will keep the pesky cyclists happy. There you are, we've made you some bike lanes. Now look at my annual report. We've just installed X kilometres of bike lanes. It was pretty hard to find any references to these kinds of bike lanes and when they were installed, but it seems they were slapped in during the 1980s, as there was some demand for space allocation for transport methods other than cars. It looks like these lanes have sat here for years, and I can understand why in the City of Melbourne Bike Lane Design Guidelines it states that City of Melbourne research indicates that most cyclists, 78%, do not feel comfortable riding in a simple bike lane. It also states that the use of simple bike lanes should not be considered for new installations. Existing simple bike lane treatments should only be maintained in exceptional circumstances and need to be carefully assessed in terms of their ongoing appropriateness and relevance, particularly their safety performance. I guess these simple bike lanes are a little different from the bike lane that allows parking. The simple bike lane is more like the car door zone of death bike lane, where cyclists are expected to ride in the car door zone, and the lane isn't completely blocked by parked cars. The type I'm referring to doesn't really have any allocated space for cycling, so let's look at a few examples. This is one of my favourites. This is Roslyn Road in Belmont, a suburb of Geelong. There is a bike lane sign, yet a small car parked here completely blocks the bike lane, and a large truck cannot even fit in the parking lane. I'm not sure what the point of this sign and the bike symbol are. They might as well say parking and have a stencil of a car. Just up a bit further on the same road, this car is completely blocking the bike lane, but this bus driver doesn't seem to care one way or another. This one flips and flops between its two signed uses, although it does a better job of being a parking lane than a bike lane. Is it Gollum or Smeagol, for any of the Lord of the Rings fans out there? Here's another one, still in Belmont on Mount Pleasant Road. With the parked cars, there is almost enough room to get my handlebars past the parked cars. Again, we have a bike lane identifying as car parking. The bike lane width varies along here, but even when it's at its widest, it is still a car door zone of death bike lane. Can drivers park their cars where it is signed as a bike lane? I tried to find out the answer, and the best I could do was an article on drive.com.au. According to Drive, in a nutshell, if there are signs that explicitly permit parking next to the bike lane, you can park there as long as you comply with the conditions stated in the parking sign. In Victoria, for example, Victorian Road Rule 153.2 states a driver can stop in a bike lane if parking is allowed at that location, as long as they are following any signs and parking restrictions that apply. New South Wales. It's a similar story in New South Wales, where drivers are prohibited from parking or stopping in a bicycle lane unless there is specific signage that permits parking in the area. In New South Wales, illegally stopping in a bicycle lane is subject to a fine of $320. It's a little different in Queensland, where drivers are generally safe to assume they can park in a bicycle lane unless there's a sign that states otherwise, or their car is too big to fit in the space without encroaching on the bike lane. Parking in bicycle lanes is permitted where safe, and unless specifically signed otherwise, a Queensland Transport and Main Road spokesperson told Drive. I love the way it references safe. Safe for who? What does that mean? If a cyclist has a crash because the driver has parked their car in a bike lane, does that mean the driver is liable as it was not safe to park their car there? It's a bit like the reversing on the road rules that states the driver of a vehicle must not reverse the vehicle unless the driver can do so safely. Anyway, I looked up the Queensland rules. According to the Queensland Government website, you can stop or park in a marked bike lane if you're allowed to drive in it, and there are no signs or road markings prohibiting it. In this text from the Queensland Government page, there is no reference to safe, so I'm not sure where the spokesperson for Queensland Transport and Main Roads got that safe reference from. The Australian Capital Territory, meanwhile, has a blanket ban on drivers parking in bike lanes, unless they are driving a public bus, minibus, taxi or hire car, and are picking up or dropping off passengers. There are no other state exemptions to this rule, regardless of parking signs. South Australia's Department of Infrastructure and Transport also forbids parking, driving or stopping your car in a bicycle lane. However, some bike lanes in South Australia only operate during peak periods specified on street signs, meaning parking is permitted outside of those stated periods. Do people only ride bikes during peak periods in South Australia? What happens if you wanted to ride the shops at midday on a Thursday? Tasmania's Department of Transport advises motorists, you must not drive your car or motorcycle in a special purpose lane, like a bicycle lane. However, you can drive for up to 50 metres in a bicycle lane to stop if parking or stopping is permitted at that place. Meanwhile, Western Australia and Northern Territory also apply similar road rules, allowing motorists to only park or stop in a bicycle lane if it has been specifically designated as a parking area. According to drive.com.au, in summary, don't assume you can park in a bike lane unless there is a sign confirming you can. In doing so, you should not unreasonably obstruct the path of other vehicles, including bicycles, as you could face a hefty fine or put other road users at risk. I'm not sure what unreasonably means, but I would have thought that any car blocking any bike lane is unreasonable. Even if parking is permitted, is it reasonable to expect a kid riding to school to move out into 60 km/h traffic to go around a parked car? So let's go back to these two locations and check if there are signs that permit or do not permit parking. As far as I can tell, there is nothing to prevent people parking their cars in these signed bike lanes. And actually, the signs encourage parking. Let's head over to the neighbouring suburb of Highton for another example of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde lane. Firstly, along this quiet Bellevue Avenue. This is a mix of some protected bike lanes, then a sign showing a bike lane with parking permitted. A kilometre away, back on the main Barrable Road in Highton, which is a busy road connecting the Geelong Ring Road to the central suburbs, we have these bike lane signs, but it is so dangerous trying to ride in these lanes. People are driving their cars at 60 km/h and they want to squeeze past as they think you should be in the bike lane, but there isn't enough room to get your bike around the parked cars. If I'm on my mountain bike, the bars are 75 centimetres wide. I'm not fitting in the narrow gap in the parking lane. Even on my commuter bike with 61 centimetre bars, there is not much space. Are these drivers complying with the minimum 1 metre passing rule, even if I am riding in the car door zone of death? I've also got this photo from Boundary Road in East Geelong, where it is signed as a bike lane, but there is no sign to indicate you can't park there. So according to the rules mentioned earlier, you are welcome to turn this bike lane into a car storage facility. There is a no standing any time sign pointing back to the intersection, but after that it's free parking, and the bike lane sign is only there for decoration. Church Street in Herne Hill is another example of the shared parking bike lane. The only problem here is that it's pretty hard to share the lane. It's like telling two kids to share a chocolate bar, but also telling the older, bigger one that they can eat it all. Any wonder this arrangement doesn't work. According to the parking rules we looked at earlier, you can still park here as there is no sign saying otherwise. If you're from the northern suburbs of Geelong, we haven't left you out. This is one from Princess Road in Corio. You might be able to squeeze an ultra-narrow bike between the parked cars and the white line, but it would be tight and you're risking the car door zone of death bike lane. I wonder what would happen if we flipped this around and I parked my bike in the traffic lane, or just rode slowly and obstructed the forward momentum of any drivers using the traffic lane. I probably don't need to discuss that, as we all know the answer. Well, I'm not sure who designed this stuff, and it really doesn't work. I can't imagine who even thought that it would work. It doesn't work for bike riders, as they can't ride in the lane if it is fully blocked. And even if there is a small gap on the outside of the car, it is usually too narrow to safely ride, as you can get a car door opened into your path at any moment. Not only are they useless for bike riders, it doesn't work for people driving either, as they get cranky when they think the bike riders should be in the bike lane, even if it is a parking lane with leaving minimal or no space to ride in it. I guess if you're Danny McCaskill, you might be able to stay in the bike lane and ride over the cars, but for most of us, that's not an option. I'm sure there are plenty of other identity crisis bike lanes around the place that are as bad or worse than these examples. Let me know in the comments where your best identity crisis bike lane is. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Please give this video a like and click on the subscribe button to see more videos looking at bike infrastructure. I'm the Bike Route Buddy, and I'll see you riding a bike in a bike lane that is only trying to be a bike lane.